Hello everyone. Update on the E39 M5 track build project. As you can see, things have been torn down a lot further than when I brought it home. Been putting in some hours trying to get everything apart and cleaned and degreased. One of my pet peeves is working on cars that are greasy, and certainly a rusty car I wouldn't have bought. That being my other pet peeve for working on stuff. But this one was very greasy and oily in spots. I'm guessing there was some long-term valve cover gasket leak, power steering leak. It's a BMW, so pretty much everything was leaking, I'm sure, at some point, and was really never cleaned up. So a lot of elbow grease going into it, but I also got a lot of stuff apart. Obviously the front subframe is out and a lot of smaller items from the front end, the wiper cowling, all that stuff. Get everything cleaned out. One important thing to make sure you do on any of your E39s is make sure those holes are open in the bottom below the brake booster there. That's a common issue, is they get plugged and rainwater gets down in there and starts to fill up until it reaches actually the back side of the booster here, has an opening, and that's where the water gets sucked into the booster. And once that happens long enough, it fills up into the booster until it's high enough to be pulled in as vapor through the vacuum line into the back of the engine and start to give your engine a vapor cleaning. Anyways, not to get too distracted here, still a few miscellaneous things that need to come off and be replaced. This brake line to the DSC pump is cut down there, so I need to take that off. Just smaller things like that. Obviously, these will need to be replaced, and I don't think it gets any easier for access. So if you have a V8 E39, obviously an M5 owner would recognize this, but 540s are the same with those hoses there. They are quite difficult to reach with the engine in place, and obviously everything else. So that'd be a good job to get done while everything's apart. Moving on, the sunroof was missing when we brought the car home, but now we've gone ahead and stripped out the headliner and the cassette and everything else except for these curtain airbags. I still have to get those out, but that requires pretty much taking the rest of the dash out to get to the connections and where it's secured. But at this point, it's really only 2 bolts, one on each side here. And this airbag has to come out first as well. And then I think I can pull the dash far enough out to get those out. I may have to lower the steering column in order to pull that side far enough out, but we'll see. Also, because I am somewhat of a purist, the sunroof motor and lights and all that obviously requires a harness. And I pulled all that back down through and just zip tied it up here because I didn't want to cut it. Long term, who knows what will happen with this car. Certainly I'm building it as a track car, and eventually if I go to the point of putting a cage in it, there may start to be some permanent modifications, but realistically all I'm really doing is stripping parts off the car to make it lighter and things that aren't needed. But theoretically, someday it could be put back to a complete interior, and a complete car certainly would be work, but certainly doable. So the interior is mostly stripped out, like I said. A little bit more to go on the dash area, and I have pretty much all the pieces I need now to put that back together. And it takes time, but it's pretty easy type work in the interior. Moving to the back, the subframe's out. Everything here is mostly cleaned up and ready to go. I just want to chase the threads for the muffler hanger studs. There's actually only a couple of studs left in the car, so I'm going to chase those out and buy some new studs, something probably from McMaster Car I think I should be able to find. You can see in the rear here is all stripped out pretty much as far as it'll go. Obviously this is required wiring. This side, the audio harness is still here. I'm planning to just tie it up and leave it back here. I did look at possibly taking it out, but it does go all the way up into the dash. And I do have access to pull it pretty far. But then once it's up under the dash, I'm not really sure that it's worth the effort to try to get it out. And it probably is integrated at some point to the main harness, if I had to guess. Plus, it also has little side things that go into the B-pillars as well that go over into the rear doors for the tweeters there. If you're wondering why there's a iron sitting here, it's because there's still some tint on the back window, unfortunately. And I found, it was also on the rear side windows, and I found the steam trick to work the best for getting that tint off. So these windows are done. I also resealed the vapor barriers on both rear doors and replaced the regulator on that one because that cable was busted and the window was just taped up. So these doors are all cleaned out and resealed. Front doors I still need to do. Also, by the way, here's our sunroof delete panel. It's fiberglass. Bought it from Bimmer World. It's actually for an E36, but it looks like it's going to work with pretty minor adjustment. The hole spacing is probably wrong, but I do plan to reuse as many of the cassette bolt holes as possible for mounting it, and I'm going to drill or put some self-tappers in the rear, but I'll drill pilot holes for the back side and then use probably window weld around the seams. The only thing I have to figure out is the dimensions aren't quite perfect up here for a tight fit, so I actually need to remove. Technically, I could just remove all the weather stripping, but then there'd be a bigger gap. So I'm going to see if I can try to just take the outer half of the weather stripping off, the flexible part that moves in and out for when you're closing and opening the sunroof. Trim that back and see if I can get it to fit snugly. I'm not really intentioning for that to be weather tight, but if I can make it closer to tight, it certainly would be better. The window weld seal that I'm planning to use, that'll be what keeps the rainwater out. That's the plan anyways for that aspect. Over here we got a pile of parts that I've either cleaned or started to clean and degrease. The subframe wasn't horrible, it still needs some work. A lot of these aluminum parts were, but they're mostly cleaned up. Got to clean up the taillights a little bit. So we're almost to the point where I can start building things, which I'm super happy about. Here's my, I guess, staging shelf for sections of the project at a time. This is most all the suspension, front and rear, steering components. We have new wheel bearings already installed. That's actually kind of a pain, is getting all that apart from the spindles or carriers, pressing the hub out for the rears, new hubs or new bearings on the hubs, and then I added wheel studs, which I ran on the other car and was happy with. But a lot of new hardware, certainly reusing a lot, but also certain things are just better to have new. More of the old ones were just rusty. I also found on eBay there's a seller that makes these steel rear sway bar brackets, since those are known to break on the E39. And we got a new set of Turner mono balls to go on, and pretty much power flex everything in the rear. So all these new arms, I have to press out the bushings and put the power flex pieces in. We got a dyed-in rear sway bar to go in as well. And everything else is still on the epic journey. So that's coming up as one of the next items as I start getting this car apart, at least as far as needed for right now. Like I mentioned in a previous video, I'm not planning to start any of the body work on it yet. But a lot of it has to come apart for that body work, so I'm happy that I'm not doubling up the work too much. But I do need the differential out of this car. Might be one or two small things in the rear, but mostly just the 345 diff. And then in the front, need to get the mono balls from the front lower control arms out. The thrust arm mono balls will stay in, because I really like the better feel that they provide for steering, even on the street, even though it does add a little NVH. And then most importantly, to come out and be transferred over are the dampers from this car. I'll put some type of, probably the stock suspension that came out of that car, just to temporarily be able to put things back together before I figure out what I'm going to run on the car. But I have a lot of time before we get to that point. But I do need the coilovers off this car, the diff, and like I said, a few other minor items. Front sway bar, which you have to take the subframe out for, so that's fun. Lots of fun. Anyways, that's pretty much where I'm at. Getting pretty close to being able to start putting things on the car. One thing I noticed during all this cleaning and degreasing and just kind of looking at everything and finding the condition, taking a look at the VIN tag on the door jamb on the new car, and I noticed that my car that I've had the longest, the VIN ends in 698, and this car is also a 2000, so same year car. So mine was built in February with 698, and this car was also built in February 705. So these cars were 7 apart on the assembly line, possibly made on the same day. I'm not really sure how BMW ran the lines, and who knows if it was the end of the day for my car and this one was the next day. But pretty cool geek thing. If you're into that, I think it's pretty interesting, pretty cool. But I guess your mileage may vary.